Welcome, everybody. This is Across the Atlantic. We provide actionable insight at the intersection of geopolitics and capital markets. Today, I'm joined by Mike Studeman. Mike Studeman, the former commander of the Office of Naval Intelligence and a retired rear admiral, is one of the nation's leading national security professionals. With extensive global experience in intelligence, foreign policy, and defense matters. He is an internationally recognized expert on Asian affairs with deep expertise on China. Studeman has led intelligence operations at every level, from the tactical to the strategic, and in Navy, joint, national, and interagency assignments. He has supported combat operations ranging from Desert Storm to the Balkans to Afghanistan. He has also contributed to a range of counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, and counter-proliferation operations. Additionally, Studeman helped formulate strategies and execute operations to deal with challenges from Iran, North Korea, Russia, and China. Mike, I could go on. You have a very long and storied biography here, but for the sake of brevity, I will cut it short, but really appreciate you hopping on with me this afternoon.
Hey, thanks, Garrett. Look forward to our conversation. I think you have some pretty hard questions loaded up. Fire away, Gridley.
Yeah, absolutely. So, given your background, obviously, Mike, in the Indo-Pacific, Asia in general, I think, a lot of folks that listen to this podcast and show are, very high level. So I always like to bring it down and do some context setting. So given your experience, what do you classify the region as the Indo-Pacific? What, regions does this make up? What countries does this make up? And why is this region of geostrategic importance to the U.S.? Essentially, why should Americans care about this part of the world?
Yeah, good. So the Indo-Pacific, let's define it. It's over half the Earth. It's 52% of the Earth, 38 countries that spans, if you take a look at the classic definition of Indo-Pacific for the United States, it would go from the west coast of the United States to the west coast of India. And it would go from the Arctic to the Antarctic. I had a former boss in the Indo-Pacific who would essentially say to visitors that the Indo-Pacific covers Hollywood to Bollywood and polar bears to penguins. So it's a really large space. If you take a look at statistics, top five largest militaries are in the Indo-Pacific. The top four most populous countries are in the Indo-Pacific. And if you take a look at the economies, four of the five top economies in the world are in the Indo-Pacific. We have five mutual defense treaty allies there. That's a pretty significant stake for us, given where they stand. And if you take a look at the world's economy, I mean, 60% of the world's economic engine turns around and over. The RPMs are in the Indo-Pacific. And some estimate that, by 2050, this could go up even higher to 70% of global economic activity. Some of the fastest growing economies are in the Indo-Pacific too. There's a whole litany, a list of those in there. So it is really a significant region where much of the prosperity and security of the world will be determined by how things are handled in this particular region.
Fantastic. I really appreciate it. I think some of that latter question of why should Americans care was like answered in that response of a lot of economic activity is happening here. And I think some of the latest headlines are reiterating that point again of just all the activity that's happening there. Now, you mentioned a few places and you mentioned a few countries, Mike. I think we probably can't talk about the region without, of course, talking about China as well, which is, of course, probably outside of the US, the second largest actor in the region. So, in your workings with the Navy and everywhere else, and your background in general, how do you see and how did you, during your time, how did you see China act in the Indo-Pacific? What are exactly its goals? I think that can sometimes be murky. And are these at odds with the US's goals in the region?
Yeah, I mean, the Chinese plan, the grand strategy is to rejuvenate by 2049. They're well on path to be able to become the strongest pole in a multipolar world. Essentially, they talk about taking center stage of the world again. They feel like it was a historical anomaly that they were, forced to experience the century of humiliation that, if you go back, 3,000, 4,000 plus years, that the Chinese, in fact, were more advanced, more civilized, more connected into the region and beyond. And so they feel it's the rightful place to be back in a place of central importance to the world, not just in the region. And so their grand strategy has, an execution plan which is got a religious fervor associated with it. I mean, all Chinese are kind of on board with the patriotic mission to strengthen China, no matter how you feel about the CCP. And so there's a lot of pride at stake. Their intention is to be able to limit the U.S. influence and the influence of the West. They think that we are on the decline, that they're ascending, that they will have to be careful as they replace us, and they're overjoyed, in fact, to see, recent policies that suggest, in fact, that we are abandoning leadership of the liberal international order, and we're self-displacing ourselves in international institutions, in the way that we're behaving, not following international law, but becoming more maverick. The Chinese think that these are the spasms of a declining hegemon. They intend not to be a new hegemon as much as, of course, they would be. They don't want to have that label. They have a very strong information game that is spewing out propaganda across the global media ecosystem, is designed to reduce any perceptions of a China threat. That has obviously had mixed results because China's own behavior has been just blatantly threatening. As their military has grown, as their confidence has grown, coercion in the China Seas, for example, wolf warrior diplomacy, economic penalties and levers that they haven't been hesitant to use. So that's their grand strategy. Whether or not they can accomplish it is a matter of great debate, given kind of the headwinds that they are currently experiencing inside China. But Xi Jinping has confidence for a reason. He is heavily invested in the long-term capabilities of the Chinese. They intend to become a techno-economic superpower that has no match, even within the United States. And so they think that's the key to everything, that if they can become a reliant superpower that's technologically strong with a robust manufacturing base that no other country can equal, then that will enable them to achieve many of their other goals, whether or not they're on the economic front, the military front, technology side, and on the informational side. So they are a juggernaut, and they're coming on very fast, and they in fact surpassed the United States in many select areas that should concern us greatly.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. And Mike, it's refreshing to hear you, I think, say it so candidly. A lot of the goals, I think, and this is just my own opinion, of course, but hearing our own leaders talk about China sometime, and this is true recently and of the past few decades, it's always, like, we're not at loggerheads, we're not, against each other, but from their own actions, China's own actions, it seems like they are seeking a place of primacy, economically, militarily, and the rest. So that's a lot of China's goals, as worrying as and concerning as they are, Mike. What are our goals? Again, from the Americans' perspective in the region, what are we trying to accomplish there? And it sounds like we're naturally and fundamentally at loggerheads, and we do have different goals and strategies and intentions in the region. But what are the U.S.'s goals in the region?
Well, I mean, you'd have to study sort of the policy elements of both the previous administrations and the current administration to begin to parse that out. But in general, there is a nonpartisan view that China, in fact, is a major challenge to the United States and our security, our prosperity, and our values. and that we need to do something significantly more on all fronts to be able to address it. It's not just an over there issue. The Chinese are actively working to exploit our society from within. They're holding our critical infrastructure at risk. They are clearly stealing our intellectual property. They're doing it through legal and illegal means. And they are clearly trying to sow divisions. So they're using their information instrument as well as doing other things across, other sectors of American society. And so the list goes on. These things have been identified. We've diagnosed the crap out of the China problem. And the question has always been how quickly we are able to actually formulate policies, how complete those are, how well they address the full suite of China issues that we have to deal with. And I think that, depending on which administration you look at, some have been, more successful in some areas than in others. And so this new administration clearly is taking a different tack, particularly with regard to allies and partners, and is operating more unilaterally, more protectionist. And so we'll see how this works. I frankly don't think it's a winning formula to not be seeking friends and working coalitions globally to be able to counter Chinese malign influence where that exists. So we'll see how it goes. So U.S. policy toward China has been generally uniform in its identification of a problem. We have failed, I think, to address the issue successfully with the American people. I think you get it event by event. I don't think I've argued that we need somebody who's your China subject matter expert, apolitical, who simply is his job or her job is to be on the podium and to answer questions about the latest developments with regard to China. So they can connect the dots, connect it to China's strategy, be able to explain how it's all working together, and to be able to, educate the American people where Hollywood's not doing it. The entertainment industry has been co-opted by the Chinese so that nothing critical of the Chinese could ever be portrayed in our TV series, our movies, whatever. So if the entertainment industry can find their courage to tell the story of what China is today and the dangers to Americans, then the government has a especially important job to do so. And by the way, academia and the think tanks do as well. And they can't just sort of talk to themselves by producing in foreign affairs. Americans in general don't read, high-end intellectual periodicals like those. There has to be some more concerted campaigning to educate Americans about, the challenge. And then I believe that American policies will be probably easier for us to implement once people understand the why behind the what, right? If you're asking for Americans to sacrifice because of the way that we need to treat China, the elevation of security over economic issues or profit issues, then you're going to have to give them the why, and therefore you're going to have to open up your mouth and talk about it and not do it just in sound bites, but in a way that actually allows people to truly understand what's going on.
I think that Mike, if you're interested, that position should be open to yourself. That sounds great. And look, I agree. I think again, this comes back to the piece that I was just saying is, how throughout multiple administrations, how the U.S. talks to its own people, Americans about the threat and how significant it is and what it will take nationally to overcome that. I think has been underserved and underplayed. So I think you're absolutely right. I think those risks and then solutions, which are probably going to be very hard and require sacrifice on a national level, I think those need to be articulated to Americans in general. And there's plenty more, Mike, in that response that I could dig into, but I want to keep us on our agenda here. So you were talking a little bit about prior, wolf warrior diplomacy, soft power in general, perception of other countries of both the United States and China. Now, I follow you on Twitter, and anybody that doesn't, you should definitely go follow Mike there. You put out a ton of very in-depth breakdowns of what the composition of specifically Chinese soft power actually is and how they view it. I think everything you've been putting out there is 100% correct, which is why I wanted to talk to you today, in part. But Mike, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the soft power competition currently between China and the United States, specifically in the Indo-Pacific. So, talking about soft power, the competition between China and the United States, soft power via the lens of Japan, via the lens of the Philippines, Korea, etc. Right? So if we could start there, that would be great. And then if you were, in charge of it all and could, snap your fingers and make decisions happen, what would you do to maximize U.S. soft power in the region?
Yeah, that's a whole conference there, Garrett. Thanks on that. So let's
Yeah.
first define terms because I do think that we can end up using soft power too loosely. And so
Yep.
soft power as opposed to hard power, right, is supposed to be an attractive force. There's something about the way you behave, what you do, the attitudes you take, the level of partnering, the kind of system that you operate, the kind of culture that you generate, that all of that has an attractive magnetic capability, a force that then brings people to you, that invites people to want to work with you more, right? And so that's something that for a long time America had in terms of the ideals that we stood for, in terms of the openness and transparency and the giving nature of the average American. I mean, that soft, power was also amplified by the skills of the entertainment industry and Hollywood to be able to create pictures of America that the whole world could see. And we became the envy of the world in terms of our economy and the opportunities and the freedoms that we offered. I think America's soft power has taken a huge hit here with because your leadership in your country actually reflects the character of who's in the White House and who America put, into the Oval Office. And if you're somebody that has a genuinely winning character that builds trust, not just with the domestic population that may be your fanboy base, but with external actors who can see that what you stand for and what you're doing is something good, right, and something they want to partner with. If you're not actually somebody that builds that trust, but you erode that trust, then your soft power immediately nosedives, right? Because everything kind of begins from the top and works its way down. Everyone knows that, if you don't line up and behave the way the president behaves, that, you may get a disloyalty, black mark and you may be gone. So you can't counter sort of the character, nature, the trajectory of your president. And so some presidents have had those kind of winning external vibes, and then some don't. And America firsters, frankly, turn a lot of foreigners off. And it's not just now a notion of a problem. It's actually the penalties, the tariffs, and all the rest, the treatment that you get diplomatically that some of our partners face, particularly in Europe right now. And so the whole world is watching, right? Our soft and hard power is so high that anything we do, of course, makes domestic news all over the world. And I think that we're squandering much of the soft power that we've been able to build up over the years. And I think the fact that you can't measure it, you can't put a monetary assignment to it, like you can't figure out the business case. So what's your reduced return on investment from it? The fact you can't do that doesn't mean that that intangible is any less valuable as a commodity in terms of how you are able to gain influence or lose influence. On the other hand, China has far more dangerous elements to it in terms of the CCP and its approach to the world. and yet they have a, veneer of beneficence because they have such a powerful, such an expansive tentacle system of narrating, kind of curating a version of China, which is like what you'd find at a Confucius Institute. It's the peaceful, loving community of common destiny for mankind sort of thing. Everybody's win-win. And they're so good at that, that much of the global South, because they don't have a counter narrative from the United States and they've been subject to
Right.
colonization over time, whatever, they're predisposed to actually take in and ingest the propaganda. And then they see dollars following it and they're like, you know what? The material payoff matches the talk. There's no say-do gap here. The Chinese talk about community, and they're willing to give high-end capital for various infrastructure projects. They must care for me. I don't think America cares for me. And so when you talk about soft power, there's the attractive force, but it just migrates into the issue that I think we're really trying to talk about, which is influence in general.
Right.
And what I think is happening is that China sees that, their ability to take center stage in the world depends on global influence, which is positive, which is going to benefit others, and they're doing their damnedest to be able to create global connections which they can leverage in the future. We in America seem to think we can just pick and choose. We don't have to worry about small states or middle states or whatever. We'll just pick a few select states and we'll work on those. The rest really don't matter. We should not spend our energy there. And I think we're looking at an asymmetry of grand strategy approach, where I think over time the Chinese have already proved that they've won over much of the global South, and ceding that amount of international support to the Chinese will have significant costs to American security and prosperity in the future. We can talk about that more, but I think we're missing something very important about the importance of investing in global influence.
Fantastic. And again, I think some of this was already answered in that response. It sounds like, again, Mike, if you were sitting in the seat, you could make anything happen tomorrow or today. It sounds like you would have the U.S. engage more with the world, maybe physically, be opening, whether that's opening embassies or maybe whether that's via investing capital, so making investments in different regions around the world. Is there anything else specifically that you would have the U.S. do to strengthen our own soft power?
Okay, yeah, king for a day. Everybody loves to hear that question.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's go there, Garrett.
yeah,
Look, when I talk about China in strategic context, and I cover geopolitics, I talk about how everything is connected, right? We're all experiencing the same things. I talk about all these macro forces in the 21st century. But one of the things that I point out with regard to the U.S. and China in this is that the Chinese understand the full power of every instrument of national power. And we seem to only want to use economic, military, and financial, and we devalue at our own costs, at our own disadvantage, diplomatic and informational instruments. Like we think informational stuff is public affairs, nice to have. Let's just talk about, us defending ourselves and our principle, defending our policy. And that's just not the way that our competitors, great power rivals of the 21st century,
yeah.
are deploying all their instruments and investing in all of them. And so here you're watching, us start to trash our information capabilities, our diplomatic capabilities through whatever reorg you're talking about. If you do major reductions in some of these key things that have actually supported a number of different global initiatives that were legit, right, that aren't controversial, that's totally legit in terms of how you build influence, then you're going to further shrink what were already relatively marginalized instruments, right? Forever, our diplomatic corps, after the Cold War, had experienced a dearth of foreign service officers. We closed embassies. We didn't put them in the right places. We retracted in a lot of different ways, and that's just not what the world requires here. We need a strong, robust diplomatic corps, which is actually able to do all of its functions and then some. You remember Secretary Bob Gates was SecDef, and somebody said, "Where would you put the next dollar?" And he said, I would put the next dollar in the State Department and our diplomatic arm, right? Because it's that important. We don't want to actually have to solve all the world's problems by using military instrument to coerce or to have to engage in a war. I want the diplomatic part to do its job to be able to actually keep the peace and to be able to prevent crises, right? So that's a data point. And on the informational side, the way I actually paint it, just to cut it short here, is that where the Chinese are pulsating out and all of their instruments and they're orchestrating them in a way that is designed to get effects, right? To shape the environment, et cetera, to be able to maintain their narrative, to be able to push into new areas of influence, et cetera. We are, off kilter. And my metaphor is a dinosaur. And I say we have a haunch that's the economy, which we use, sanctions, right? Financial is the other, haunch. Like we'll use that as well to be able to shape behaviors. And it's like a T-Rex with the jaws of the military. And we have these two tiny little arms the diplomatic and the informational, and we
Right.
expect to be tromping around winning friends in the jungle, and it's just not going to work. And there's a lot of diminishing returns, in fact, which is in effect our financial tools. We so overuse financial and economic that countries are hedging and they're moving away. They're looking at digital currency. They're trying to reduce the dependency on the dollar slowly but surely, abetted by the China, Russias, and others in the world buying gold and doing all sorts of things. And so, if we're not careful here, we're going to end up out of balance and unable to compete because we just haven't thought through exactly how to use all our instruments. That's my recommendation. Review them, understand how they're all useful, invest in them, and employ them for effects in a symphonic way to be able to actually give the president more options for America and to do things in a more sophisticated way that is designed to advantage the United States and our partners and allies.
Fantastic. Yeah, that is an all-encompassing answer, for sure. And I think that's a good recommendation, good prescription, if you will. And I think that's great. I mean, look, I think you can kind of get a sense of a lot of the things that you're talking about today, and we're leveraging the assets that we have, or we're leveraging the levers that we do have to pull, but just wrongly, one or two, inefficiently, which is maddening for you and I and folks that are viewing these things. Say like, hey, this is probably not the way to win people over and influence people to get the outcome that you want. To put it, I guess, super high level. But thank you for that, Mike. So
Here,
bringing us, oh yeah,
Can we
yeah,
just, can we just put a fine point on that? Because I
yes,
think
yeah,
people
hmm
think, oh, that's a conceptual thing. Yeah, I don't want to spend time on that. That doesn't affect me. You can see a MAGA crowd or young skeptics who are like,
right,
I don't understand. So that's like the old internationalist traditional view, which didn't get us very far. And I'm here to say it actually did get us very far because we became the strongest nation on the planet with the strongest economy, with the most allies and partners and friends, and most access to markets, et cetera. And we do an amazing amount. It's like $1.4 trillion worth of business with the EU every year. $1.4 trillion, right? So we should be friends with Europe
right,
for that alone, right? But the
exactly,
issue is that if you look at the Chinese approach, and part of the strategy is to outfox, outwit, outlast the United States by having influence in areas where they can actually sell their goods, right? And they can not just outcompete, they'll outbid us on price. They will lower the price just to get market share. And then they essentially close out market after market after market, where now US companies are not competitive anymore. And in fact, in many ways, those US companies naively not protecting their IP, their intellectual property, or doing business in China, they give up their tech secrets, right, through lack of security or with some promise in the China market. And that's changing, of course, given the conditions now. But they
Hmm.
have done that, and they've allowed the Chinese to build up competitor capabilities and then essentially underbid the US in the international system, not just within China. And you're seeing a whole number of companies that have gone under. You take a look at, solar power panels, batteries, electric vehicles,
Telecom.
telecom, the list goes on. Shipbuilding, machine tools, satellites, drones, quantum. I mean, the statistic was the Chinese lead in 37 out of 44 critical and emerging technologies. They lead 37 out of 44. Okay. That's the implication, right? This is the issue. And when you have that kind of cornering of the market on technologies, you then become the best athlete. And if you can sell at a lower cost because you're getting state support, subsidies, and all the rest, then you will put America's economy and our companies simply in a very, very difficult position where they don't have access and they can't be competitive versus the China model, right? And so
Yeah.
all this matters, and it will come home to roost for the average American. Your job or the level of your income is going to be related to all of this stuff.
100%. And you make a really good point too. So 37 out of 44 critical technologies. One, I didn't know that number was that high. I knew that they were leading in some, but not that many. So that's again, a, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Crazy to hear, frightening to hear. And then two is obviously like right now in this administration, there's a big conversation around manufacturing, right? And so if I'm kind of just connecting the dots in my head as we're talking, Mike, but if they're leading in that many critical technologies while also being, on the high end of manufacturing, for a lot of these things. I mean, that's stark and that's scary. A big reason why I don't need to give you a history lesson, of course, but like, a big reason why we won World War II was not because we had better technology than the Germans. It was because we were a manufacturing powerhouse. And so if they have both technology and manufacturing, that's a scary thought. And I guess not even thought, it's a scary fact.
Yeah, Kirk Campbell and Russ Doshi, former Biden officials who were in charge of the Indo-Pacific, uh, essentially wrote a foreign affairs article, and they said, okay, not only should you not be uh, feeling triumphant with regard to Chinese economic headwinds, but you should be taking a hard look at exactly what their advantages are. And historically, it's the country that actually can, in fact, scale and mobilize more capability that ends up being the big dog on the porch. And the Chinese have clearly got numbers that we can't match, and we can't do what we did in World War II to be the arsenal of democracy.
Right.
And so we have a problem, Houston, and most Americans don't understand it. The Chinese intend to become a techno-economic superpower. They got the full backing of the state support. They're invested all over the place in making sure that they can corner these technologies, critical technologies, and they're leading in key areas. They have more than double the number of STEM PhDs. They have 8 times the number of, BS engineers in China. We've educated many of them, so they're not just, people that went through another education system. They went through ours um, for the most part. And, they're building up their own education system and innovation centers to do more basic research and more advanced research. All the while, they're essentially cohabitating and living within our innovation ecosystem because we're an open society.
Right.
Many Chinese are not only supporting their own wallets and their own, profits from the business that they belong to, but they're helping Mother China, and they're
Yep.
given off to the side through associations, Chinese associations, the intellectual property that will always allow China to stay not just competitive, but potentially be the first to field and the best athlete in this techno-economic competition. It's this massive thing that we just talked about. The Americans either underestimate or don't understand fully,
Right.
and the Chinese will change the world based on having this amount of capability in this area because from all of that capability flows the size of your military, right?
Yeah,
The throw weight into the markets and the international system, the willingness of people to work with you and to see that you're now the most significant superpower on the planet, the indispensable nation that everyone must engage and be nice to. That's the
100%.
future that's starting to loom.
Yeah. You know, techno-economic superpower is a term I keep hearing. Do you think, and this is kind of like a tangent to the point that we're talking about now, but obviously the US dollar still holds primacy as the world's reserve currency. Do you see any threat to that? Because everything that we're talking about could be true, could be going China's way, but they still don't have the yuan or the renminbi as the world reserve currency. I don't see that happening anytime in the coming decades, but the world that we live in, I feel like volatility, geopolitical volatility is at an all-time high. So who's to say? But right now it seems incredibly unlikely. But we're rankling a lot of our peers and partners as we're talking about. Do you see that as, happening in the future?
It's a saving grace for us at this stage of the game, and I hope we hold on to this as long as possible. But just know that the red side that's colluding more and more together, that it represents more of the Earth,
Right.
intends to move away from the U.S. financial grip that we have over, many nations and many transactions, right? So they're actively working this. This is why they're spending time in Bitcoin and digital currency, to experiment with ways where that can substitute, for, everything going through the American financial, institutions and key to the US dollar. So yes, China is unwilling to actually do what's required to make the yuan a more acceptable, attractive basket currency within the international system. It would entail too many things that would have political consequences that they, aren't willing to suffer through. And so that could change. That's an internal domestic choice that China makes, and that could be a policy decision there. But we have to be very careful too about the U.S. mismanagement of economic affairs. Already, you saw, this squirreliness happening in the bond, reserves and all the rest. And if we can't pay, our debt back, right, to pay off our deficit, then things are going to look really, really shaky. And so be careful of assuming that everything's just going to work out here. There are courses of action where we could end up having a perfect storm that could really disrupt our financial rating on the world scene and the willingness of people to trust, in fact, that this is the best place, to put their dollars.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I know it was a little off the reservation, but I had to ask since we were already on it. That was where my mind was going. And Mike. We talked a little bit about this, and I think it's a really good thread to pull on. So China's cyber theft, cybersecurity, and everything related. I forget who exactly had this quote. I'm sure you might know it, but it was called, Chinese cyber theft is one of the greatest transfers of like wealth and knowledge in human history ever. And again, I forget the who said that quote, but it's 100% true, and it's crazy to think about. How has China's use of cyber espionage and cyber theft added to their advanced technological capabilities? I think at this point, it's pretty safe to say that they could realistically challenge the U.S. in their own region. I don't know about the rest of it, rest of the world. But I guess starting with the first part there, how have you seen China's use of cyber theft and espionage?
Yeah, General Keith Alexander said that
Yep.
years ago. He was the director of the National Security Agency, and so in charge of many cyber related things. So he understood what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm associated with the National Bureau of Asian Research, and they calculated that the amount of intellectual property theft that China steals every year is 250 to 600 billion dollars worth per annum. Most of that in the United States. And so think about it. If you've been doing this for 15 plus years,
It's trillions of dollars.
and it's hundreds of billions, you're trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. But more important, like not just the value. This is the actual tech that then they copycat, play around with, re-engineer, give to their people to support their ability to then exploit that technology to their advantage. So they've had huge shortcuts. I mean, they are very capable from a technical standpoint. They're no dummies, right? And you underestimate them at your own peril if you think they don't know what to do with what they steal. They absolutely know what to do. They have an entire system that's architected to be able to put in requests for information into the whole system to get a breakthrough, no matter what it is on the science front. They have an entire system that's out there gathering, you know, hundreds of thousands of grains of sand all the time, kind of working it so that they're always on the edge, able to power up their own industries. A lot of this is, state-owned enterprises with commercial, companies and various, areas of innovation. But this is also why the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, has become, so capable so quickly over time. And the fastest modernization of militaries in anybody's memory, right? And in recorded human history, it'll go down as one of the most breathtaking, surges in military power, fueled in many ways by their access to not only steal, but actually legally buy into enough shares into U.S. companies to get their secrets and only to get their secrets, to do legal transfers of technology, for companies that deal with the China market, um, to all sorts of other techniques that they, use to be able to grab IP. And so we helped build the PLA. The PLA that can kill Americans was supported incidentally by Americans not doing sufficiently strong hardening to be able to resist exploitation, or to find kind of a security insider threat, or to understand the implications of transferring tech to the Chinese. Collectively, they've been able to capitalize, and the reason why they're so capable now is because essentially they've parasitically been able to live off us.
That is, I hear that every time. It gets just so infuriating because to me it just seems like something that is easy enough. I say that very loosely, but it seems like it's easy enough to be able to counter, right? I mean, how does the United States not have these cyber safeguards in place? But as we found out, definitely over the past 5 or so years, particularly at the federal government level, I just don't think any rules were in place to have these cyber safeguards. Now I think that's probably changing, and we also go on the offensive as well. But just doing the basic blocking and tackling of keep our secrets safe, I would have thought was already in place. So that's
Garrett, that's
yeah,
just let's put the right context on this. I mean,
yeah.
people recognize that we need to do something about this, and so we have had a variety of different initiatives inside the government, working with commercial companies to kind of warn, tip, to share information about breaches, and to strengthen cybersecurity. And you have the whole National Institutes of Standards and Technology that provide kind of cybersecurity protocols. What elements of security would you need to strive for to be able to be more secure? But in the face of advanced persistent threats, APTs as we call them, state-supported, sophisticated, high-end folks with the tools and the, intent to drive into a problem, it's really difficult for an individual company, I think, to fully protect themselves. And so long as American companies and international companies produce weak software from birth, which they do because they want to quickly get something just to be able to do Internet of Things, function. So long as they continue to actually produce software that has holes and bugs, and nations will capitalize on 0 days, and they'll be able to continue to reap the benefit of our more digitally dependent world. So we need to get squared away, but it begins with everyone doing their part from the upstream stuff in terms of IT manufacturing, all the way through to the implementation and the digital hygiene that we need to follow, including every employee having an understanding of how to do things the right way, in through accountability for poor performance, regulations from the government with regard to certain things, especially in critical sectors, and then the enforcement, side of this. And there's also a conversation that we don't want to have, and that is about how do you deal with, Chinese in the system that may be in our labs, our academic institutions, and our companies, and you don't know that they're spies. They could, in fact, be, very loyal and thankful of living in the United States and don't do anything to support the CCP. But there are plenty of them that do support the CCP, some for their own personal interests because they want a job later, or they want to help their families. Some of them are not classic spies. They're approached by the Ministry of State Security or the Ministry of Public Security or whatever. And so that actually is the most uncovered topic within our China discussion. What do you do about the Chinese who are actually inside all of our vital organs here in so many different companies and institutions across the board? Strider Intel produced a statistic that said in the last 20 years, there are 160 Chinese that were operating in Los Alamos labs with access to secrets. And some of them went back to lead the Chinese hypersonic program, the unmanned systems and robotic programs. These were people that were allowed to come into Los Alamos, that were given a clearance, that were given a chunk of, secrets, and then, beat feet back to China. How does that happen in our system? And it
Yeah.
happens because we're not alert to the threat. We haven't talked about the nature of this whole of society anti-Western approach and the exploitation that's occurring at every level in our country. And until we talk about it, until we get to the hard conversations about how we protect their civil liberties, right, and not compromise who we are, but also harden ourselves in the right way, I'm afraid we won't essentially be able to shut the doors to the exploitation that's occurring every day.
Yeah, it feels almost as if it's a fight happening in the dark, and it's really hard. And I get this. It's a human thing, and it's also a people in power thing. So any administration, nobody wants to admit that you have a soft, wide underbelly, right? But in fact, especially when it relates to the things that we're talking about on cyber and everything else, we do. And this is kind of adjacent again. I was at a conference last year, and Mike Pompeo was the key speaker, and this was a topic that he spent most of the time talking about, and I completely agree. Although he obviously knows more than I do, but he was essentially saying what we're talking about today on the cyber front, and already within the homeland, I guess, but on the critical infrastructure front. So water cleaning facilities, how we transport electricity from our cities to generation and vice versa. So everything else. And, his opinion was, look, they're already here. And this is essentially, there's many goals with that, but it's essentially a hedge should there be an actual kinetic conflict. And I think the biggest one that everybody has in mind, and this leads us, Mike, to our next question, and topic of just Taiwan in general, right? And so if you want to comment on the critical infrastructure piece, please do. But I am curious to get your thoughts on Taiwan. Why is it important? It's often referred to as the unsinkable aircraft that's right off the coast of China. Obviously, TMCI and semiconductors are made there, which fuel all of the world's leading sectors and industries. Do you think that China could realistically invade its neighbor in the next decade? And I realize I gave you three pieces there, so we can go sequentially if you want, and I can repeat any of that.
No, so let's talk about the last piece. I do
Yeah.
think that we oversimplify the China problem. Many people are like, well, it's just about protecting Taiwan. And we'll see
Hmm.
what the administration wants to do. They're not clear, actually, on their Taiwan policy. As much as they've elevated China, its status is a big question mark with regard to what we're going to do. But if we think through the China problem as just, hey, deter. All I have to do is deter China. This is I think, a very sloppy intellectual way to think about the problem on so many different levels. First of all, what are you deterring? Are you deterring the invasion? Are you deterring gray zone behavior? Are you deterring corruption globally that they're involved in? Are you deterring their willingness to put cyber implants on our critical infrastructure? Tell me what you're deterring. All of the above, one or two things. And sometimes people go deterrence is deterrence so they don't invade Taiwan. So it's not another Ukraine just in the Asia Pacific. And I'm like, look, that's an outside in problem, which has significant, issues and repercussions we can talk about. But if you boil it down just to that, you're out to lunch, dude. You need to go home and study for like, months, and then come back and talk to somebody about what the real China issues are. That is an important component, but it is not the only thing. And it actually voids if you obsess on this. We got to get that right, by the way. We have to be able to deter a fight, and we have to be able to win a fight if it goes down. But that's an outside in, dynamic. The issue that we were just talking about is the inside out fight of every day,
Right.
right? And so what is it you do day to day to win the peace, to harden yourself, to stop, this hemorrhage of technical, expertise that goes over to China to strengthen them across all, of their instruments there. That to me is the central question. Inside out, please. Outside in, let's meet in the middle because there are going to be a lot of issues that then come to the fore when you're looking at it from those perspectives. Taiwan is important. Taiwan, sometimes you forget that when we're talking about Taiwan, people are like, well, it's the chips, it's the advanced manufacturing where they produce 90% of the world's most advanced chips. And it'll take some time before you can build up, fabs and manufacturing capability in the United States or in other countries to compensate for the potential loss of the Taiwan capability. But it's not just that. Let's start with the fact that there are 23 million people in China, in Taiwan, that have been operating with a thriving democracy for decades now, and that they're one of the most efficient and capable and effective democracies out there. They were the ones who actually were able to respond and deal with the pandemic in probably the best possible set of ways, right? We have a lot to learn from Taiwan and how that democracy produces real effects for their people. And they did the best in the pandemic, right? And so that's what we're talking about to begin with, is a Chinese speaking democracy. Point out other Chinese speaking democracies, please. This is what's galling to Beijing and the CCP, that you have Chinese people that are separate and not under control of the Chinese Communist Party who are doing well. They are doing well with the democracy, showing how it could actually have application for the Chinese culture and Chinese people. And their economy, is going gangbusters. The Taiwan economy, it's a top 10 trading partner of the United States. The Taiwanese put, a substantial amount of foreign direct investment into the United States every year. Um, they were a former mutual defense ally until the Kissinger-Nixon switch in the 70s there. So we have long-standing military ties, and we continue to maintain those here because we have a Taiwan Relations Act that was passed in the 80s, which essentially says that the United States must provide sufficient material for the Taiwan people to be able to protect themselves in the face of any adversary threats, and that we need to provide sufficient capability for them to do so. And so we are called upon by law to, in fact, support Taiwan's military capability so that they can protect themselves. Uh, Taiwan is important for so many different reasons. Take a look at their medical contributions to the World Health Organization and others during the last COVID scare. Um, that's been significant. They have a lot to teach the world about how to deal with information threats. That they have cyber hacking in there is like 2.4 million attempts at cyber hacking every day. And so how they actually are becoming digitally literate, uh, for how they do fact checking, how they do instant corrections, whatever. They're actually one of the most proficient in the information domain, and we learn a lot from them. But let's talk about the bigger issues. The bigger issues, besides the fact that they're a thriving democracy that's very, very capable and a thriving economy, which is important to the world and to the United States. You think about a takeover and what that would mean for our allies if the Chinese are successful. This is sort of a test of U.S. resolve. Do we have the resolve to do anything about this, or are we going to belly up and sort of just let it happen? And people will be making judgments about the reliance of the United States in a Taiwan contingency. Did the United States do anything? Did we try and lose? Because if you tried to deal with the Chinese invasion and you lost, then clearly there's a different kind of strategy in Seoul and in Tokyo and Canberra and Manila and other places.
Hmm.
They will have to rethink who their security can be provided from. And this is a scenario where you can get in talking about nukes, Japan not trusting that American extended deterrence is reliable. South Korea is already talking about nukes
Right.
there in a more serious fashion. So nuclear proliferation brings in more friction points, more threat of miscalculation, and none of that would be good for the world in the 21st century. But the Chinese would be happy to take over kind of the goose that lays the golden eggs right there in Taiwan. They love to capture TSMC for the chips, but it's more than that. This is a political issue, not an economic issue. This is about them feeling like Taiwan is slipping away. The U.S. is abetting de facto independence, that the time is not on their side, that more Taiwan youth identify as Taiwanese and not as, Chinese. And so they are trying to arrest a negative strategic trend using every tool in their kit bag. They realize that some of the other tools are insufficient, and so they're using the military more often to exhaust the Taiwan military, penalize the independent-minded Democratic Progressive Party that's currently in power under President Lai. And they are trying to show, in fact, that the PLA has the ability to isolate Taiwan and the resistance is futile. And if they keep this up, if they keep, voting for DPP leaders and they keep trying to deepen ties with the United States, that there will be a very grievous cost to the average Taiwan citizen. So they're frustrated. They're using more mill than ever before, in addition to all the other tools that they've been using. And so we're in dire straits with this. And this is the reason why people talk about the 20s being the decisive decade.
Yeah.
What we do now really matters. What everybody does will determine whether or not this spirals into conflict, right? Or there's a way to manage this through to a place where we can get to something that people can live with, a modus vivendi that can benefit everybody.
What's your opinion on that? Are we bound for kinetic conflict in the 20s? Is it inevitable?
Well, the way I talk about this, I have a whole way of looking at all factors that the Chinese think in terms of opportunities. And if we avail them of opportunities where they're tempted to resolve something with more physical measures, think blockade, other ways that you can actually increase pain points on Taiwan. You don't have to actually invade to have cyber attacks, to plink with cruise missiles or, ballistic missiles and wreck the Taiwan economy. Yeah, you can try to stop energy, LNG vessels that are not even close to Taiwan that are headed that way and really cause some problems. So there are lots of different choices that China has to really put the hammer down on Taiwan. So let's not think about the most,
Right.
challenging, highest gamble one, whatever. There are lots of those. Would those be put in play under certain circumstances? And I would say absolutely yes. I can see the Chinese taking an offshore island as a strategic signal about their seriousness is something they can do lightning quick. and essentially scare the region and send a signal to both Taipei, Washington, and other capitals. I believe they can also keep notching up the pressure in other areas. The opportunities, the way to look at the Chinese decision-making calculus is to understand that they think through the lens of, you can go back to Lao Tzu and the notion of sure, which is the propensity of things. They think that you have to monitor the external environment and all of its changes all the time because every object inside that environment is affected by the whole. Like they're very contextual in taking a look. And if the context actually opens up a number of different opportunities for you to move, you should move then and not wait. Don't do it when it's not propitious. But if that propitious time comes, first you got to be sensing with a fingertip feel so you can really see if there's an opening to a potential move that you can make. But it's about all the environmental conditions, domestic politics in the PRC, what's happening in Taiwan, what's happening with U.S. resolve and the U.S. president and their willingness to get involved, what's happening with the U.S. allied system, what's the military correlation of forces, how many countries in the world would economically be too dependent on the Chinese to say boo about an invasion that would start killing people in the Indo-Pacific, and the list sort of goes on with all these factors. I say Xi Jinping's goal, his implacability to bring Taiwan into Chinese control. This is considered an essential part of their rejuvenation, not an optional part, but an essential part. We have 25 years left, and we have a leader in Xi Jinping who's potentially got a good 10 years, if not more, still in power. And so I do think that this could come to a head, and we therefore need to be prepared to maximize our deterrence capabilities with our allies and our partners, and to think through a really bad day where, in fact, you're in a fight and it has not only critical infrastructure hold at risk issues that could cause havoc in the American people and our economy, but where we have nuclear escalation issues that would absolutely be a part in all of this here. So we don't want it to come to this, but I'm telling you, on the Chinese side, they're the ones who've made this an issue. They're the ones who are driving for a resolution politically, and they are serious about building up their military so that it is able to secure Taiwan. So we need to treat it just as seriously as they are.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah, that's really good to know. And it's often a question that I ask folks that I have these sit downs with is, is it realistic and et cetera and the rest, right? But I think that the way that you contextualize it is the right way to think about it. And in fact, it's also interesting to hear that that's how they like, they contextualize, and one piece is part of a whole and all these pieces are constantly changing and moving around. So appreciate that, Mike. So I'm looking at the clock. I do want to keep us on schedule, and I want to be respectful of your time here. I know you're a busy guy, so Mike, I'll bring us to a wrap here, and thank you for everything. But before we go, I do want to ask you, where can folks find you? What are you working on, Mike, and what is new with Mike Studeman?
Well, thanks for that, Garrett. I enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully, I didn't go too long on some of the stuff. It's
No, trust me, I could go all afternoon.
Yeah.
This is
Hey,
great.
these are serious issues that
They
have,
are.
a lot of gravitas associated
Yeah,
with them. That's the reason why I'm so hard on, hey, if it's this big, then our government, our entertainment industry, think tank, academia, they all need to be involved in actually talking and having conversations with the American people about this. And you can hardly get a word in edgewise. It's China bad, clearly.
right.
And not all things actually are bad with China. There's a bunch of benign stuff, and the government needs to be able to define that line between where benign leaves off and malign starts to grow. And so we need to be very responsible about how we talk about China. With regard to getting in contact with me, you're right. I continue to post on LinkedIn, on X, and to a lesser extent on, my Facebook account. I wrote a leadership book called, and there's a picture of it, Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity. I was so concerned about how we are leading in the United States in all professions that when I retired, I wrote that. So I'm out there speaking where I can. So if people want me to talk about leadership, I'm happy to go ahead and do that. I have my hands in various pots. I'm a MITRE National Security Fellow part-time. I'm with a think tank, the National Bureau of Asian Research. I'm with West Exec Consulting. And I continue to try to give back to my alma mater, and I really open myself up and would like to talk to the younger crowd in universities and colleges about many of these things. I think that geopolitics and leadership go hand in hand. And so that's what I like to talk about and what I think is really essential for us to understand these days. And anyone who is interested in hearing more, I'm happy to come visit them and have a talk or two.
Fantastic, Mike. Really appreciate it. And again, I do want to thank you for your time. I mean, the insights that you provide are staggering. So please, everybody, go check out all the links, and we will post those below. I'll get those from you. But Mike, thank you again for your time. Thank you again for your insights. I think you're one of the foremost leaders when it comes to thinking about U.S. positioning on China. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Garrett. Appreciate it. And thanks for what you're doing to highlight these issues for so many people that are trying to understand them better. I think you're doing a great service to everybody out there. So keep up the good work.
Appreciate it. All right. Thank you so much, Mike.